Hey guys, what's up? So in honor of my 250th review on this channel, I'm covering a Mondo exploitation horror shockumentary film from 1981 from the director of Faces of Death, one of my favorite shockumentaries, one of my favorite exploitation films. And tonight's movie is Faces of Death 2. So obviously, if you know about Faces of Death, you know what the film is. The first film, well, you know what the first film is and what it's about. This film is much like the first one. It's just about death, about short scenes of death and related materials, mortuaries, accidents, police accidents, drug use, filmed by like TV crews and stuff. So our film opens with footage of a police car and a crime scene with credits over it, and the music is really annoying, and it just keeps going and going and going and going. So then we meet Francis B. Gross, the narrator from the first film, talking about how the first film, which at this point is probably 4 or 5 years old at the year this came out, he says that the first one is way outdated, and isn't that it isn't like relevant anymore. Okay, so he decides to make another one. Next, we have shots of a castle, a countryside, a graveyard, and he's talking about how people used to fuck corpses to try to bring them back from the dead, while the screen shows us corpses and funerals. Alright. I get this has to do with death, but still. So, we get more shots of graveyards and people, and Dr. Gross starts talking about how people plan their funerals. Now, this is Faces of Death, not Faces of Funeral Planning. I don't want to. I get it has something to do with death, but still, this is Faces of Death, not Faces of Funeral Prices. So we see the traditional Hindu cremation. It's kind of interesting, I guess. Then we get the Face of Death by Fire, with footage of an apartment in Germany that was caught on fire, and a man with third-degree burns on his hands and legs and face who died a very slow death. And then the polar opposite segment, we get one about freezing to death and about dying from avalanches and snow and people being dug out of the snow and stuff like that. Then we get a segment about boxing. Like, really? Boxing? This is Faces of Death, as I've said before, not Faces of insert verb here, or insert noun here, or insert really any word here. It could be Faces of Very, and it would still so, and I can get it, and I get that, fighters can die in the ring in boxing matches, but it's but that it just talks a while about how like people in that do boxing, they train themselves vigorously, and they work hard to get in shape for it and build up their endurance, and that's like 90% of the segment. And then the last 10% is footage of a guy's fight. Well, actually, the last about 9% is footage of a guy's fight. Then him in the 12th round, passing out and dying. So, yeah. Then we get back to Dr. Gross, who's walking through a park. And our next segment is about daredevils and stuntmen, something that was already covered in the first film. I mean, at least the first two segments weren't, kind of already covered. And then we get real footage of a stuntman who got in an accident and died. A stuntman who wanted to do a jump with a pickup truck who got in an accident and nearly died. And then another guy who got in an accident and nearly died. This is Faces of Death, not Faces of Injuries, people. Come on. Then we get a plane crash, a couple plane crashes, which people did die, so I can't really complain there. Although I kind of have to complain. I mean, it's faces of death, not faces of violent accidents or plane crashes. I mean, I'm not trying to nitpick here, but it just kind of feels a tiny bit out of place because in Faces of Death, the first one, I mean, there's like, you know, two or three segments about like, I mean, there's two or three scenes in the first Faces of Death about like plane crashes and car wrecks and train derailments, stuff like that. But still, I keep saying, but still. So we have more crap and some possibly real footage, I can't really tell, of a village of innocent people in Vietnam that was accidentally hit with napalm and most of the people burned to death. And that kind of goes on, and then we have dead kids who were victims of cluster bombs and stuff like that. And I mean, if that footage is fake, then they did a pretty decent job of it. If it's real, I mean, that's kind of gross and maybe a little bit sickening, but not really disturbing. So what there is of faked footage is badly acted and written, although there aren't any real kind of actors in this film. What there is of real footage, or at least footage that looks real, it's decently shocking. It does keep your eyes open a little bit, but other than that, the movie is just kind of the same Faces of Death, just with a few segments, just with a few new subjects of death changed. And that still doesn't make it any more interesting. That actually makes it more boring. I mean, you're covering boxing, and which is something, I mean, sure, that wasn't covered in the first one, so I gotta give them a little bit of credit for originality. But boxing, for the most part, while it is a very dangerous sport, it does not end in death that often. Then there's the one about accidents. Like that's like we covered that in the first film. One about stuntmen. We covered that in the first film. One about burning by fire. That's original at least. One about freezing to death. That is at least original. There's one about whaling. One about um, you know, nuclear tests on people. I mean, those were pretty interesting, but still not that. Still kind of not as intriguing as the first film. Really, some of the segments they show us don't really have to do much with death either. I mean, there's one segment where they talk about how these soldiers were tested on nuclear radiation, and some of them ended up with leukemia. I mean, sure, leukemia can end in death. Overexposure to radiation can end in death. But this isn't faces of leukemia or faces of overexposure to radiation. This is faces of death. All right. We want, death. So yeah. Um, really the movie is just boring. I mean, it's not really worth watching. Um, the effects in the film are pretty good, I guess. That's one of the few positives I can give. Other than that, it's not that interesting or enjoyable to watch. Then again, the first one isn't very enjoyable to watch. Um, and this is coming from someone who has seen the first one about 10 times. On the gore meter from 1 to 10, 1 being something like the corpse grinders, and 10 being something like brain dead, Faces of Death 2 is at least a 6. While the gore is pretty high, especially with the scenes of wailing, that part was pretty gross. And there are a couple scenes with like how corporations perform experiments and test their products on animals. Those few scenes are kind of hard to watch, but I mean it's decently shocking, but it's nothing original. It's nothing we haven't already seen in the first film. Well, besides the few new segments that are covered, but the few new subjects that are covered, but that doesn't really, but it's still the kind of same cookie cutter BS. I don't think I'm going to be covering the third one anytime soon, at least not within the next year or two, if I'm still doing reviews at that time. If you're looking for an improvement on the first film, or a similar experience to the first film, then go and buy the first film. Go and watch the first film on YouTube. Go and watch the film. Go and see the first Faces of Death. That one is, actually shocking and, decently watchable and kind of entertaining. I say that very loosely. Um, this one isn't. It's not really an improvement. It's just not good. I can guarantee you that that this is not worth your time. Especially, it doesn't matter if you absolutely loved the first one, like to the point where you've got like the poster art tattooed on your body, and you have like fucking Faces of Death everything. You have the Faces of Death's breakfast cereal, Faces of Death comic books, Faces of Death the flamethrower. It doesn't matter because you're probably not gonna like it. I mean, this movie at least a 1.5 out of 5. It at least deserves that. It's no any higher than that. You're just giving it a kind of pity vote. Anyway, guys, this is Biscuit Boo 69 celebrating 250 motherfucking reviews. I'm so happy for that. All the links for the social media, Twitter, Facebook, podcasts, and Rotten Cotton t-shirts are in the description below. I'm Biscuit Boo 69 signing off. Peace, guys.